Welcome, students. So here we're going to have an introduction to Section 4 conductors. So in your technical training, depending on your levels, whether it's 1, 2, 3, or 4, etc., your knowledge of this section is critical. All right? So level 1, you're not going to know everything in this section. The book isn't laid out where you just knock off one section after another and you know it and you move on. There's always deeper parts within sections that you learn based on your technical training and with your practical experience in the job. But it's critical that you get a solid fundamental understanding of this section in your first year. And then you build on that through subsequent years. All right, so we're going to run, in this little mini lesson here, we're going to run through the generalities of the section. So let's take a look at the scope. Of course, we have the note to Appendix B. Anytime you get reference to Appendix B throughout your technical training, it's critical that you go there and look at it. So later on, you have some time, you guys go and take a look. So we're going to run through the rules, and I'm going to leave it up to you to go take a look and see what it says in the Appendix B, and use that as a reference, because that's really it is. It's an understanding for you to help you understand the general rules. And in this case, the reference to Appendix B is right in the scope, versus that reference to Appendix B can be right next to a rule, etc. All right. This section applies to conductors for services, feeders, branch circuits, and photovoltaic circuits with regard to A, the determination of maximum allowable conductor ampacity, B, the determination of maximum conductor termination temperature, C, the selection of neutral conductors, D, the selection of conductor type for a specific condition of use, and E, conductor identification, so colors, etc. 2, this section does not apply to other conductors except where specifically referenced in other sections of this code. So that's a great kind of broad description of what this section covers. Subrule 2 of the scope. This section does not apply to other conductors where specifically referenced in other sections of this code. 4-002, size of conductors. Except for flexible cord. So for example, flexible cord meaning like an extension cord per se. Cap tire, the kind of name that you hear thrown around on the job site, flexible cord. Except for flexible cord, equipment wire, and control circuit insulated conductors and cable, insulated conductors shall not be smaller than number 14 when made of copper, and not smaller than number 12 gauge when made of aluminum. Now, equipment wire is generally what we use in the manufacture of control cabinets and internal wiring within equipment. Control circuit insulated conductors, you'll see different later on in your training how we deal with ampacities of those conductors, etc. All right. Critical is the next part, 4-004. This rule has incredible amount of sub-rules. We could spend an hour and a half, 2 hours just on this rule. So at this point, we're just get a little general description here, and then your further training will drill down through it. So 4-004, sub-rule 1. Is for copper. 4.004 subrule 2 is for aluminum conductors. They're identical rules. The only difference, one is for copper conductors and the other one is for aluminum. The Canadian Electrical Code book is written for copper. So as you go on through your training, unless they say it's aluminum, it is copper. All right? So when you're out in the field, a lot of the wiring that you use for service conductors, etc., is aluminum. But in your training, when we talk the Canadian Electrical Code, we're talking about copper. All right? Unless aluminum is specifically referenced in a question, we're dealing with copper. All right. So, subrule 1, A through G, is for copper. Subrule 2, A through G, is for aluminum, and they're identical. All right? Then we have all the subrules that pertain to subrule 1 and to subrule 2. So it's an incredibly long rule. As you can see here as I scroll through on the screen up here, and hopefully you have your code books in front of you, we have subrules 3 all the way through to subrule 26. So, once again, subrule 1 for copper, subrule 2 is for aluminum, and then all these subrules apply to each one, whether it's copper or aluminum. Then, we have the termination temperature limitation rules, which we're going to do a separate video on that. The restrictions on temperature limitations. Whether the equipment is not marked or how you deal with it when it is marked. For you further students, years 1 and 2, years 1 especially, you're going to have a tough time understanding what sheath currents are. But what they are is when we have current carrying conductors covered with a metal covering, whether it's a copper covering or aluminum, we get induced voltages in the sheaths which cause sheath currents to flow. So how we terminate the sheaths, etc., we have to deal with them once they're over a certain ampacity. That's 4.008. Subrules 1 through 7. Then we have our flexible cord rules. Sizes of flexible cord. Flexible cord shall not be smaller than number 18 gauge copper conductor, except for tinsel cord, which shall be permitted to be 27 EWG size copper. Tinsel cord is what you see in the little appliances. For example, a curling iron, etc. It's just a thin band. It's like the tinsel you put on your Christmas tree. It's a very thin conductor. It's generally tiny and very small current carrying capacities. Then we have specific rules for ampacities of flexible cords, ampacities for equipment wire, insulation of the neutral conductor, size of the neutral conductor. So there are times where we were allowed to reduce the size of the neutral. It doesn't have to be the same size as the other service conductors, but we must meet certain criteria to do that. It's contained within the rules. Subrules 1, 2, 3, and 4. We have the common neutral conductor rule, a rule here that very rarely throughout your training, especially in first, second, third year, that comes up per se. 4.022. Installation of the identified conductor. So all you students now, we must install a neutral, the identified conductor, at each switch location, regardless of whether you need it or not. So ramifications for your three-way switching, doesn't matter whether you need the neutral or not, you're going to have to install it. And that falls under sub-rule 2 here. The identified conductor shall be installed at each location of a manual or automatic control device for the control of permanently installed luminaires at a branch circuit outlet. All right, very restrictive rule. There is no relaxation there. 4-024, identification of insulated neutral conductors up to and including number 2, AWG copper aluminum. This is a rule that tells us whether we can use a white conductor from the wholesaler or where I can apply white tape to it, etc. And how I deal with it, whether it's an armored cable or a piece of non-metallic sheath cable, or I'm using it as a switch link. Then we have the identification of the insulated neutral conductor larger than number 2 copper or aluminum. Identification of type mineral insulated neutral conductor. So mineral insulated is a special type of conductor. Unless you're working in an industrial type plant, where there could be an oil sands plant, refining or mining, etc., you might never see that in your career. Use of the identified conductors, very important rule that you learn this throughout your career. Identification of insulated conductors. So this is our coloring if they are required. All right? Then we have the ampacity of portable power cable. So generators, etc., they use them in the movie sets, etc., supplying temporary power. You see a lot of this in that. The DLO, where it says when type DLO cables used, diesel locomotive is the term, and it has the reference to the tables to it. Always remember bold headings when you're using the code book. It's much easier than to scope through the whole rule. Is look at the bold headings and you'll save yourself some time. And that's the end of that.